Last week, I revealed my top 25 wooden roller coasters. These coasters truly are the best of the genre. And they're as close to perfect as you can get. But is any ride truly perfect? In this video, I thought it would be fun to identify one thing I would change on each of my top 25 wood coasters to improve the overall ride. And I would like to note that I will not include restraint or train changes. Otherwise, I admittedly would suggest adding buzz bars to a lot of these rides. Again, most of these changes probably won't ever happen, but I thought it would be fun to take a look at. Number 25, Renegade at Valleyfair. The weakest element is actually that unique S-bend first drop. It doesn't give any airtime or laterals. Therefore, my change would be to make it a straight drop like Texas Stingray that gives some really good airtime in the back row. Number 24, Goliath at Six Flags Great America. Length is the obvious issue with this ride, but I'm limiting the change to an existing element on the ride. Therefore, the weakest element is that first turnaround, and I would change it into an outer bank turn. RMCs with outer bank turns give fantastic airtime. Number 23, Heide's 360 at Mount Olympus. Roughness is the obvious issue, but no one element is rougher than the others. For that reason, I identified the weakest element as the finale. And the change I would make would be make a tighter crest like the Junior Gravity Group wood coasters on the final hill or two. That way you get a really sharp, abrupt pop of airtime before you go up to the brake run. Number 22, Roarosaurus at Storyland. The weakest element on this ride is the tunnel turn because it's really shaky. Therefore, my change would just be to retract that section of the ride. Number 21, Tremors at Silverwood. The weakest section are those slow two hills before the last two underground tunnels. Therefore, my change will be to lower these two hills so you take them with more speed. That would hopefully give you some airtime. Number 20, Rampage at Alabama Splash Adventure. The weakest element on this ride is the fourth hill. You have two other camelbacks on the ride that give really good sustained floater airtime, but the fourth hill is a relative dud. Therefore, my change would be to either make it a tighter crest at the top, or reduce that hill overall to make it a speed hill or two, so the whole train gets a really strong pop of airtime. Number 19, Mindblower at Fun Spot Kissimmee. General shakiness is the biggest issue with this ride, but the weakest single element is probably that 90-degree turn. Compared to the rest of the ride, it just doesn't give any airtime or force. Therefore, my change will be to replace the 90-degree turn with a more traditional turnaround that gives pops of airtime entering and exiting. Number 18, Rutschebanen at Tivoli Gardens. The biggest issue with this ride is consistency on the brakeman or brakewoman operating the ride. Therefore, that would just be my general change, to get more consistency there. Number 17, Cyclone at Luna Park. The weakest element is the final turnaround. Most of the hills in Cyclone either give really strong laterals and or good airtime. But that final turnaround is a dud in both areas. Therefore, my change would be to have a sharper entry and exit to this turnaround. That way, you get one last pop of airtime before the ride ends. Number 16, Mystic Timbers at Kings Island. The weakest element is the drop on the far turnaround. It's really shallow and doesn't really give any airtime. Therefore, my change will be to have a sharper drop off that far turnaround, and then have a low to the ground turn. That way you still get the good sense of speed that you got in that drop previously, and the drop will now give a pop of airtime. Number 15, Ravine Flyer II at Waldameer. The biggest overall issue with this ride is that it loses steam when it climbs atop the ravine at the end of the ride for the second half. But for an individual element, I think the weakest single element is the third drop. That hill is really high compared to the rest of the ride, and you barely make it over the top. The front row gets no airtime in this element, and the back row only gets a little airtime if the ride is fully warmed up. Therefore, my change would be to reduce the height of the third drop. That way the entire train will get some nice airtime going over the top. Number 14, Boardwalk Bullet at Kemah Boardwalk. The weakest elements are those final hills if you're riding in the back row. If you're up front, you still get some pops of airtime towards the end of the ride. Therefore, my change would be just to make the drops a little bit steeper at the end of the ride so the back rows can get some airtime. Number 13, Colossos at Heide Park. The weakest element, without a doubt, is that helix. It kills the ride's pacing. Therefore, my change would be to straight up remove that helix and just turn right into the finale. Don't replace the helix with anything, and if you go right into those final bunny hills, you'll have more speed and you'll probably get some sustained ejector airtime in those final hills, as opposed to the floater airtime you currently get. Number 12, Shivering Timbers at Michigan's Adventure. So this one's actually interesting, because this actually happened. The weakest element was an old section of trick track that by all accounts really beat you up. The change was to replace with a bunny hill that fit in seamlessly with the rest of the ride and gave some good airtime. Number 11, Ghost Rider at Knott's Berry Farm. The weakest element is the fourth hill. It gives decent laterals, but absolutely no airtime. My change would be to reduce the height of the third hill, so you can get airtime at the same time while you're getting some laterals. Number 10, El Toro at Six Flags A Great Adventure. The weakest element to me is the speed hill in the middle of the ride. It only gives a little bit of airtime, and it offers a reprieve from the insanity you get from those initial camelbacks and the Rolling Thunder hill. Therefore, I would make this hill be a little more compact so it gives some ejector airtime. Number 9, Swamp Fox at Family Kingdom. The weakest element is that final speed hill. If you're up front, you get thrown forwards, but in the back, you don't really experience anything on this hill. Therefore, my change will be to adjust the profile so the back gets thrown forwards in this hill. And if you want an example of this, look at the speed hill earlier in the ride that did that. Number 8, Boulder at Liseberg. The weakest element on this ride is every single turnaround. Instead of rising up into the turnarounds, I propose you keep them level so you can take them with more speed. You could also keep them unbanked so you can get some laterals. This will improve the pacing of the ride because you'll get to the airtime hills faster, and you also might get some more sensations on those turns. Number 7, Boulder Dash at Lake Compounce. A few years ago, there was actually a triple up that got brutally rough and Lake Compounce reprofiled into a double up. But right now, I'd say the weakest element is the far turnaround. It just doesn't have any airtime entering it, and it actually is a valley point because you enter it so slow. Therefore, my proposed change will be to reduce the height of that far turnaround so you get an airtime pop entering into it, and then you'd still have the same speed in the return run. Number 6, Wildfire at Kolmarden Zoo. The weakest part of the ride for me are those final turns after the last drop. Therefore, my proposed change would be add a tiny little speed hill on the way to the brake run to give you one last pop of airtime. Number 5, Phoenix at Knoebels. The weakest element for me is the third hill. It does give some airtime, but you really have to be in the very front or back car to experience it. Therefore, my change would be to reprofile this hill so it can cause airtime like the finale bunny hills or even the fourth hill. Number 4, Coaster at PNE Playland. The weakest element on this ride to me is the first turnaround. It's taken really slowly and just doesn't do anything. Therefore, my change would be add a little dip into this turn so you can get some laterals as you're rounding it. Number 3, Outlaw Run at Silver Dollar City. The weakest element for me is the first inversion. It's still really good, but it could be improved. My change would be to make this element a 0G stall so you can get really strong and sustained hang time. Number 2, Voyage at Holiday World. Now, I'm going to assume it's running trimless like at Hollywood Nights, otherwise I'd say removing the mid-course trim. The weakest element to me are those back-to-back turns on the return run, and they're pretty good elements, they just aren't quite as good as the airtime hills. Therefore, my change would be to replace one of those turns with an airtime hill. And coming in at number 1 is Lightning Rod at Dollywood. And the weakest element to me is the first hill. If the ride's running at full speed, this hill will give you a good pop of airtime. So my proposed change would be, assuming I can't increase the launch speed, would be to replace that first hill with a 0G roll. The slower speed would work well on a 0G roll because it would give you more hang time, and the rest of the ride would be the same insane ride we've come to love and know. These are the changes I would make to my top 25 wooden roller coasters. Would you make different changes to these rides? Or what changes would you make to your favorite wood coaster? I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate if you gave it a like and you considered subscribing, because there'll be a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for watching.